comes from Portugal and is the PI and group leader of, and member of the board of directors of I3S at the University of Porto.
Great. First, and most important, thank you very much for coming, and actually thank you very much for the invitation. For me, it's a huge pleasure to be here for the first time and to visit another faculty of pharmacy. I'm collecting faculties of pharmacy around the world, which is very nice. But thank you both of you for inviting me, for hosting me so well, and thank you for all of you for being here to listen a little bit about part of the work that we are doing in our lab that is related with in multi-compartmental 3D immunospheroids models for anti-tumor therapeutical screening. This is just one of the research lines that we have, but I think that it's important to spread these new tools that are being developed by us and by others in terms of validated medicines. And medicines needs to come to the market as soon as possible, as cheap as possible, and all the effort that all of us are doing in terms of speed up this process are very, very welcome. So, if you want to know more a little bit about the work that we are doing, I invite you just to follow our websites, our social networks, and also my personal profile, where we will have a kind of resume what the science that we did. We have the opportunity in the morning to discuss a little bit more about the particular project, but today I'm just to talk about spheroids and how we can use these spheroids as tools for advanced therapeutics. Well, just to contextualize a little bit these tools, so what are spheroids? So I think that all of you know that spheroids are assembly of cells, basically, in such a way that can try to resemble as much as possible a kind of tissue. And most of the time we associate spheroids to tumor tissue, which is true because we rely on tumor cells to construct this 3D architecture of tumor. But in terms of drug screening, spheroids can be much more relevant rather than conventional 2D dimensional models, because with spheroids acquiring a 3-dimensionality, we can track also how is the pathway of particles and drugs in deep sides of tumors of the tissues. And this is something that 2D screening tools do not allow us to perform. So spheroids are that important because they have this 3D-dimensionality, but also because besides of the cells, we have other components that also account for the evaluation of therapeutic outcomes. And the component says anything that is outside the cells. We talk about ECM materials, we talk about different factors that the cells are releasing, also in terms of the different gradients of hypoxia and normoxia, or also nutrients that are important for the behavior of the drugs. So in terms of the spheroids, we will have this in combination. And I hope at the end of this hour I will convince you that spheroids actually can be much better than the classical 2D dimension. So everything starts a few years ago where we start getting training and gaining knowledge in terms of the spheroids construction and validation. We published a couple of I would say, nice and interesting public review papers describing the use of different kinds of spheroids in case that you are more interested to know better these tools. But to gain experience to write review papers, you need to start earlier to develop the tools. And that's what we did. But actually, this is where how I believe that we have significant expertise to rely and to trust on spheroid models. So I will tell you different stories of different spheroids. And I will start by the beginning, of course. We'll start doing colorectal cancer spheroids in the lab around 5 years ago or so. And at that time, we are discussing efficacy of anti-colorectal cancer tumor drugs. So we thought about constructing a spheroid, combining tumor cells from the colorectal area, but beside that, we need to address other specificities of the tumor that most of the times the tumor cells are not able to perform alone. Namely, the interaction with stromal components. So we consider a spheroid combining tumor cells with fibroblasts and also the immune components of the tumor. And that's why we combine also with macrophages. So this is where everything starts in our group. So we start by developing this triple spheroid. Of course, the development process of spheroid is a time-consuming process, but after optimization, the idea is to have a pre-validated procedure to seed up this spheroid. This was the concept at the beginning. So we start by doing the characterization of the spheroid. And every time that we do mono, dual, triple, or quadruple spheroids in the group, we always want the controls, and the controls are very important. So that's why we have a control of monospheroids made of just tumor cells, double spheroids made of tumor cells and fibroblasts, and our triple spheroid with the 3 different cell populations. So this is immunohistochemical control. We just want to make sure that the 3 different cells are there. We did it by immunohistochemistry, and also we quantify the number of cells that we have on the spheroid at the time of maturation. That case was 7 days. And by flow cytometry, we know that 90% of the cells that are on the spheroid are due to tumor cells, roughly 5% are fibroblasts, and up to 7% are macrophages. This is very important. Why? Because the ratio between cells at the end of the product of the spheroid must be as close as possible the ratio of cells that you have in the real tumor. Otherwise, we are not replicating what happened in view. And how can we address this? Changing the different initial ratios, because cells, they have different double times growing and so on. So we optimize the process in a way to have this spatial organization of the spheroid. And you see, we have cells spread around the wall. Of course, the tumor cells are the most abundant, but we have macrophages and we have fibroblasts as well. Okay, the spheroid was done, but was missing here something. Because we know that in tumors, we have a high level of vasculature. Angiogenesis is an issue, particularly in colorectal cancer. So we decided to make the spheroid a little bit more complex, and we include endothelial cells with the ideal situation to form small vessels in order to improve the penetration of the particles towards the core of the spheroid. But we know that with this time frame of 5 to 7 days, probably the vessels were not formed properly. But at least we have the endothelial cells there, secreting factors that could be important for the evolution of the tumor, and also can be important for the evaluation of the therapeutic performance. So in here, we optimize this quadruple spheroid with different cell ratios. So this is the optimization process. But this was the concept. You see, we have the 4 cells, so the tumor cells, endothelial cells, fibroblasts, and macrophages. We grow the cells in high throughput manner in a agarose mold, and then we did all the physical chemical characterization. This is just very beautiful images about the construction and the properties of the spheroid. In the triple and the quadruple, so we can see again the tumor cells are the majority of the cells that are populated the spheroid. We see also the endothelial ones all spread around. I guess I have a better picture here, right? So here you can see it better. So we have all the cells that we have on the spheroid. We have the tumor cells, the monocytes, the fibroblasts for the triple, and for the quadruple, we can also see the endothelial cells a little bit in clusters on the spheroid. Why do we do this imaging characterization? To have an idea of the spatial organization of the cells, first, to confirm the presence of the cells, and it will be important to understand how the therapeutical approach will result in change of the morphology of the spheroid afterwards. I'm afraid that it's not working, but it wants to be a 3D movie where we see clearly the division, the splicing of the cells all around the spheroid. Okay, coming back to the spheroid, so now we need to test it. So what's the purpose of the tool without doing any kind of test? So we did different approaches. In that case, we took our quadruple spheroid, colorectal spheroid, and we treat the spheroid with a nanotherapy. We encapsulate the anti-angiogenic bevacizumab antibody into chitosan-based nanoparticles, and we look at different aspects of the spheroid. On the cell viability, okay, and viable cells by the time, and also in the histology. So we have the different controls. I want that you focus mostly in here. When we have the bevacizumab in different nanoparticles or in the free stage, and definitely we see here a necrotic core that is related with the formation and maturation of the spheroid, and also it's there. But what's more important is on the degrees of the cell viability, particularly when the spheroids were treated with these nanoparticles that contain bevacizumab. And compared to the free bevacizumab, you see that the decrease of cell viability was not that high. And in that case, we want to observe decrease of cell viability because it means that tumor cells have been killed. I mean, tumor is being treated. And as the drug here is a Th2-genic drug, we confirm that bevacizumab is not only active, but it can penetrate deeper the tumor, resulting in a decrease of endothelial cells. And if the angiogen is compromised, probably a second chemotherapeutic drug that will come will kill the tumor much easier, much faster compared to the individual tumor. We have also another application in that case is we use irinotecan as a model drug. We encapsulate irinotecan into ZAIN-based nanoparticles, and again we look at the viability of the cells of the tumor when they were of the spheroid when it was treated with nanoparticles. Again, and we compare bevacizumab also in the irinotecan. So we have a dual delivery, a Th2-genic drug and a chemotherapeutic drug, and for the combination, that's where we observe the better results in terms of decrease of cell viability. We are not killing all the cells, of course. Why? Because this is a time of study very short. We usually have 1 to 3 days of treatment because the spheroids cannot be maintained over 7 to 10 days. It depends on the kind of spheroids that we have. But at least it gives us a very good clue how the treatment gives us a tendency towards the treatment. And we always validate the in vitro models that with in vivo application. I'm not going to talk about in vivo delivery today because the topic is just on spheroid. But this is definitely an indication that the treatment will work. If by any chance we don't see difference, it's not worth to continue for in vivo validation. Okay, what we are doing now with this spheroid? So the spheroid is fine alone, but we are trying to combine the spheroid with an intestinal model, also in vitro. So for this, we are growing a transwell-based intestinal model. So we have an epithelial layer with enterocytes. We have the lamina propria with fibroblasts and collagen and all the other material. We have an endothelial layer underneath, and we insert the spheroid either inside the tissue, so inside the epithelium of the tumor, or on the top of it. So we have an in situ approach or an invasive approach. Why? Because in an in situ approach, we try to resemble the early stage of evolution of the tumor. In an invasive approach, we are trying to reach late stage of the tumor. And with this combination of a multi-compartmental approach, we can not only treat therapies that can be given orally, so we can put on the apical side of the transwell, but also therapies that can be administered intravenously and putting them kind of on the basolateral side of the treatment. This is just the concept yet. We don't have that much data, just some image in terms of the placement of the spheroids, meaning that the spheroids can survive on the top of the intestine, artificial intestine for years, for days. But the concept is here. I just want to let you know that it's possible to make this kind of combinations. Okay, another very interesting model that we developed was a breast tumor spheroid. So again, the concept was the same, combine different cell lines. MCF7 is a gold standard for breast tumor cells, so we combine with fibroblasts and macrophages, exactly the same recipe, let's say. And what we want to look at here, we want to look how is the response of immunotherapy and chemotherapy for breast tumor. I'll give you just some characterization. Again, characterization is very important from the cell viability point of view and from the histological point of view. Because from histology, we see that the spheroid is a compact mass of cells that with the time we start growing a necrotic core. So the ideal is that we use the spheroids, we test between the maturation and before they reach this necrotic core state. Because particularly for testing anti-proliferative drugs where they are act when the cells are still in the division process. So this is just for characterization, and then we use here two approaches. One was using gefitinib when it was encapsulated into using PLJ-based nanoparticles. So again, we observe a significant decrease of cell viability when the spheroid was treated with the drug inside the nanoparticle compared to the free drug. And this is justified by two reasons. First, the nanoparticle can penetrate deeper than the free drug, in one hand, and in the other hand, you have a sustained release of the drug from the particle. So, in terms of the therapeutical time window, you can postpone the end of the effect because of the matrix of the PLJ particle that is releasing the drug for a longer period of time. So it works again in terms of the gefitinib, but we also test for other applications. This is an example, very recent as well, where we use these polyaniline magnetite nanoparticles they are known to have the ability to promote the differentiation of macrophages in a pro-inflammatory phenotype. So we just look at the image of these particles, and then, if you see, when we treat the spheroid with the nanoparticles per se, there's no drug inside, just these magnetite nanoparticles, we observe a decrease of M2 markers, considering that M2 is at an inflammatory state, and we also saw a slight increase on the M1 marker as well. So this was a clear evidence that the spheroid could be used to validate the pro-inflammatory capacity of these magnetite nanoparticles, which was good. We also did recently apply this spheroid for photodynamic therapy. In here we established these star-like nanoparticles made of gold and quantum dots. So the idea is that if you irradiate the particles, they start to release factors that can cleave raw sensitiveness, and then they can kill the cell. This is actually a very nice particle that you see from imaging. And so we treated the spheroid with the particles, we irradiate, and then we look at effect. You see how the particles can be located within the cell, around and within the cell. And when we look at cell viability, that is most important and most relevant study is that when we have the full photosensitive nanoparticles, and then when they are irradiated with the cells, we have a significant decrease of cell viability compared to the particles that were not irradiated. So it means that the combination between the irradiation and the particles reduce substantially the cell viability of these spheroids, assuming that in terms of the breast tumor. So this is very flexible, though. You see, this is where we can eventually have kind of interaction with many groups, is that we have a tool, and depending on the particle of the drug or the technology that we have, we can test it in order to confirm whether or not we are in a position to go to a more complex in vivo study. This is another example of a glioblastoma spheroid. So glioblastoma is also very critical disease to be treated. Actually, there's no cure for glioblastoma. So that's why we also have lots of interest in this disease. So what's the composition of this glioblastoma, of this spheroid? So we have, again, tumor cells, bullous monocytes, so from donors, and brain microvascular to primary endothelial cells. So we have 3 cell lines of human origin that we use for the construction of the spheroid. So again, physical chemical characterization, we have histology of the spheroid, we track the size and cell viability of the spheroid over the time, so that we can use this spheroid in a time window of 7 days, which is fine. And then we have more physical chemical characterization. Fine to see that endothelial cells are a little bit spread around the spheroid. Macrophages usually they tend to go to the outer layer of the spheroid because these are migratory cells, so the cells can migrate towards the outside, but still they are present. And there's the combination of the full spheroid. And then we test a very particular kind of nanoparticles that we developed before. These are particles that were functionalized with histidine, and this histidine is known to be a substrate for the histidine receptor that most of the tumor cells have on their membrane. So the idea was to see whether or not, if we treat these cells and later the tumor with histidine functional nanoparticles, they localize preferentially at the tumor cells. And that's what we observed. There's also time dependence internalization, but there's no doubt that for histidine nanoparticles, we have increase of almost up to fourfold of internalization compared to the particles that were not functionalized with histidine. And this was observed in a 3D spheroid model. Then we also look at different kind of approaches, like in here, when we have drug inside, so use docetaxel for particles that were functionalized with histidine and particles that were not functionalized with histidine, just pegylated. Again, we observe a significant decrease of cell metabolicity even compared to the free drug. Okay? And this was actually when we performed this experiment in 2D, we didn't observe this difference, and it was only possible to observe this difference when we look into a 3D dimensionality of the two. So again, we validate this nanotechnology. But this is, again, this model is still not finished. So what we are doing now, we are using the same glioblastoma model, and we are trying to observe how it behaves when it is underneath a brain-like spongified scaffold, meaning the extracellular matrix of the brain where the tumor grows. So we are developing an hydrogel, mostly based on collagen and with a hyaluronic acid, just to, first, to make sure that the spheroid is viable, and it is with the time. And then, we want to put the spheroid on the top of an endothelial layer that resembles the blood-brain barrier. And so the spheroid is surrounded by the hydrogel with endothelial cells underneath. And then we want to do two things at the same time, at the same experiment. We want to check whether or not nanoparticles can cross the BBB in one hand, and then if they act as anti-cancer towards the glioblastoma tumor that we are growing on the other side. And for this multi-compartmental model is quite challenging to set up and to maintain, because there are many cells around, so we have 6 cell lines here, lots of hydrogels also to give, and in terms of the setup is not that easy, but we are trying to manage it. And we have already some preliminary data that shows not only that the barrier, the BBB barrier, is not compromised due to the presence of the glioblastoma itself, which is important, otherwise we just have a passive diffusion process, we don't want to see it. And also that the spheroid can grow inside, and that's what we saw. So the spheroid can grow. So we are now ready to start testing therapies. And with the flexibility of this model, we can test therapies that can be administered intratumorally, so on the top of the transwell, or therapies that can be administered intravenously that can cross the BBB and reach the tumor model. So this is, I think it's something that I have a particular interest in terms of these multi-compartmental models, very similar to the one that I showed before about the intestinal and the colorectal tumor. Okay, another example, I promise I have just 3 more. Another example is the example of osteosarcoma. So another devastating disease, so particularly for child, so we know that is very severe without proper treatment. So what's our idea here? Is to understand not only how osteosarcoma develops, but how the metastasis of osteosarcoma can be somehow fighted. So because of that, we established first an osteosarcoma spheroid, and then we want to understand how the cells that migrate from this spheroid can metastasize into other organs, namely to the lung. So for this, we set up an organ-on-chip approach where in one compartment we have the spheroid, the osteosarcoma spheroid, that in a real scenario is in the bone that is linked by microchannels that resembles the capillaries that are coated with endothelial cells. And on the other side, we have an epithelial layer of lung, where theoretically cells that migrate can deposit and form metastasis. So this shifted idea is to assess how can we fight directly the osteosarcoma, but how can we avoid the deposition of metastatic cells from the osteosarcoma in the lung. So we can test for different therapies in here. So we start, and we did this with different cell lines, so I'm not going to much more details, but we use different cell lines with higher capacity of metastasization and low capacity of metastasization. So, very important, which is the composition of this spheroid? The three main components, cell components that we have in vivo. So we have osteosarcoma cells, macrophages, and mesenchymal stem cells with this stimulus capacity of growth. So this is the combination of the three cells that we have. So we start by did the characterization of the spheroid, so histology, a lot of histology. We also did some TED images by the spheroid just to compare the inter-organelles of the different cells. Finally, to see that we observed lipid droplets that are also very common to be present in osteosarcoma. Then we did some, not so much detail, but some immunohistochemistry with the different cell lines. These are the three cell lines that we are using. Why three cell lines? Because I told you before, they have different capacities of metastasization. So the idea is to have a model that can be flexible for cells with higher capacity to migrate and lower capacity to migrate. But long story short, the spheroids are very similar independently of the cell line that we are using. So we did cell viability, macrophage, the position, and so on. And then we start coming to more complex data in here. So what we want to observe is whether or not we can simulate M1 or M2 phenotype of macrophages that we have on the spheroid, depending on the treatment that we have implemented. So when we differentiate spheroids into an M1 phenotype, cytokines that are present in the inflammatory state are overexpressed. So we did it by ELISA with a multiplex, and then it's translating these colorful graphics. And we have a no-stimulate control, and also the stimulation for the M2. So this is important because depending on the degree of the stage of the disease, we may want to have towards an M1 or an M2. And this is important as well because it will help us to define which is the ideal combination of therapy depending on the degree of advance of the disease. Right? Then we got this, I like this image. This is very nice because we can combine all the tumor cells around in blue, okay, with the, actually the blue cells are, the blue is all the cells, with the green ones that are the tumor cells, that are the most representative in here. Monocytes are still around as well, and mesenchymal stem cells. So you can combine these cells in just one, and you see how these cells can be homogeneously represented in the sphere as they should be in a real tumor. It's not working the image, so it's more or less the same idea. Okay, so we have the spheroid established. Now we need to have the other side of the model. That is the endothelial layer that represents the capillaries, and the epithelial layer that represents the lung mucosa. So we see this, we did some characterization, and we observed a completely integrated membrane on the top, which is important from the lung. And then, okay, we also see how these cells can be migrating in the different ways. These are cell lines with higher capacity of metastasization, and these are cell lines with lower capacity of metastasization. And you see from the movement that they migrate in the different speeds. But anyway, they are present in the basolateral side of the ship, right? Then, sorry, see it? But then we can also start to observe some cells on apical side. This one that you see here in green are tumor cells that migrate from the spheroid and were located then on apical side. So with this model, we can track actually the migration process, so metastasization, and now we are ready to start stopping this metastasization process. Where? Wherever we want, or whoever we want, that in different places. Because we can use drugs to kill the primary tumor over there. We can also use drugs that can block the migration through the inner cells of the endothelial layer, or you can just target cells that actually can form secondary tumors on there. So again, this idea is not just validate therapies, is to validate the model, and the model was fully validated. And we are still optimizing it because we do it for osteosarcoma, but you can do for potential for any other kind of tumors that you can generate. And lung was one of the sites of migration of the cells, but we can find other organs where osteosarcoma cells tend to migrate, namely at the brain level, for instance. So we just need to replace here a BBB, the endothelial layer by a BBB, and then have here eventually a kind of glioblastoma artificial spheroid, and we see this cross communication between the two tumors. But I think the concept is nice, and it was very recently published. Okay, let me talk now another one that probably it's one of our new toys at the house in terms of playing in terms of multi-compartmental approach. This is an example of a spheroid of melanoma. We have in the morning someone was talking about melanoma, so we also are working with melanoma. And for the melanoma, it is even more complicated because not because of the treatment, but because of the late diagnosis and because of the metastatic capacity that melanoma has. So we thought in terms of construct a spheroid, combining the most important cells that we have in the melanoma. And for those who are not aware, we have melanocytes, of course. We have keratinocytes, fibroblasts, and macrophages. So this is a combination of the different drugs. But we want to do more. We want to understand how this spheroid can grow within the skin, human skin, and can be used directly inside the skin. So we are constructing a real artificial tumor in healthy skin. I will go step by step. So we start by growing and characterize the spheroid again. So this is just the graphical abstract from the work. So we have the cell lines. We are working with keratinocytes from patients, fibroblasts from patients, and monocytes from patients. So we take the skin from volunteers, from patients, and we use the primary cells that we isolate from the tissue. We are not using yet primary tumor cells, but we can also use primary tumor cells, just because we don't have material enough yet for doing. So we are using cell lines, but the idea is to use also primary tumor cells. But what is important is that the cells that we are using here for the spheroid are from the same patients that provide us the skin for the implantation of the spheroid afterwards, in order to avoid immunorejection. So this is physical-chemical characterization in terms of diameter, in terms of cell viability, and so on. Also very nice to see is in terms of sphericity and convexity, just to see if the spheroid is round or not. Usually we associate tumors to round things, to spheric things, but it's not necessarily the case. But in terms of spheroids, yeah, this is one of the parameters that we see where if the spheroid is growing in a proper manner. So this is just physical characterization. The more complex is the spheroid, the more controls you need to run. So we have a monospheroid, a dual spheroid, triple, and quadruple. So our goal is to look at the quadruple spheroid. And as we are using primary cells from patients, we need to use spheroids from different patients. So we need to increase a lot the statistics of the study. So it's very time consuming in terms of characterizing it. Okay. So then we have histology again of the spheroids. This is important. We used to look at the Ka67. It's a marker of cell proliferation. So just to give an idea, if we are in a early stage of maturation of the spheroid or in the late stage. The S100 is a marker for melanocyte. Sorry, for melanocyte. So the degree of differentiation of the tumor cells. So it's fine. This is also imaging from the others that I showed before, where we observe the presence of the 4 cells that we have in here. Very important is to see that when you use immortalized cells on the spheroid, we have a different pattern compared to patient-derived cells. So usually patient-derived cells are have a higher proliferative state compared to the immortalized cells, which is, we know from the basic biology, because if they are immortalized, they have a limited number of passage codes. Okay, more physical-chemical characterization and imaging. It's one of the good things to have advanced microscopes is that we have very nice pictures. So look at the last line again, where we observe the melanocytes, so the tumor cells, the keratinocytes, the fibroblasts, and the monocytes. The 4 cells are there, and that's the combination of the 4 images. And the beauty of this thing is that with the same spheroid, we can check the different cell populations. You just need to use different filters of the confocal microscope. More, we can also look at the position of the cells. So this is within the spheroid, where we observe tumor cells, mostly, where we observe stromal cells. So this is a good indication in terms of biodistribution of the cells, spatial distribution, and this is an indication of number of cells, the type of cells by spheroid. So independently of the kind of spheroid that we are using, the tumor cells are always the most abundant cells on that. Also, M1, M2 proliferation, so different donors. Look at the macrophage population, it's always between 4 to 6%, which is what we will also observe in vivo, which it's fine, and gives here a clear picture that independently of the donor that we have, pattern can be changed, but we have always a capacity to modulate the M1 or M2 phenotype. We give differentiated factors in the culture media to differentiate preferentially macrophages in a pro-inflammatory or in the anti-inflammatory stage. Okay, then we test drugs on these effects. And we look at the literature, we look at those drugs that were the standard of care in terms of melanoma, and we did just the treatment with the free drugs without any kind of particle yet. Okay, for the mono, the dual, triple, and quadruple forms. And what we observed was that we have a time-dependent effect of the different drugs, and the one that results in better outcomes was this vemurafenib, that actually is the one that is more in trial in terms of the treatment for patients, and it correlates quite nicely with the data that we found from the literature using this kind of spheroids. Then we also performed more bioinformatic tools to correlate the action of vemurafenib with the expression of the most important markers in terms of decrease in invasion of mutation of the cells and the decrease of the angiogenesis. This is mostly due to the capacity of migration of these cells in terms of metastatic capacity. We know that the upper layers of the skin are not highly vascularized, so it's not an issue, but still, if you decrease angiogenesis, we have the potential to also to stop the metastatic capacity of the tumor. Okay, then we start, okay, if vemurafenib was the best one, we encapsulate this in LNPs. We are doing pH-responsive LNPs to see how these particles can increase the performance of this of the drug with the steroid. And that's what we have in here. So when we have the drug inside the lipid nanoparticles combined with therapies, we also use the siRNA to silence the c-Myc. When we have this combination and in encapsulation, particles have a better response compared to the free drugs and compared to the controls in a, of course, concentration-dependent manner. So we observe that not only these lipid particles can go inside the spheroid and release the payload, but the combination is synergistic in terms of treating the tumor. Okay, so this is all the spheroid, but then we thought, what about if you put this spheroid inside the skin? That gives us a natural matrix to grow as in a normal condition of the tumor. So for this, we collect skin from donors, still not donors with melanoma, so healthy donors. We extract the cells from the donors to construct the spheroid, except the tumor cells, because we use the cell line in that case. And then we insert the spheroid inside the skin and see how it survived with the time first. And then if you can treat the tumor that is growing underneath the skin, simulated by this spheroid, with topical therapies. So this was the overall concept. So this is how we can assure that skin is viable. So when we collect skin from patients from the hospital, the skin is viable in our hands at least for 2 months. Of course, it's maintained in culture media, and viability is based on histology and also on cell viability. For 2 months, we can assure that the skin is viable, which means that we can put the spheroid inside the skin, and during this 2 months of time frame, if this spheroid is viable, it's because of the skin can provide nutrients, can provide conditions for the viability. Fine. Then we make the graft of the spheroid. This is a spheroid that was injected inside the skin. We have here a mono, a dual, a triple, and quadruple spheroid. This is just the zoom of the image. So we can clearly see by histology the presence of the spheroid. Okay? Not just the presence of the spheroid. Let me see if it is on the next slide. No. But in the area of the skin that we inject the needle to release the spheroid inside, that was a partial recovery of the surface of the skin, which is good. Otherwise, we don't have a leak of material from the epidermis of the stratus corneum outside. So the spheroid grows, and then we look at different donors and to see how the spheroid can be viable with the time. So different donors, meaning different kinds of skins, different phenotypes, and so on. So we are increasing more data just to make it more robust. So the spheroid can grow at least up to 2 weeks for 14 days, which is nice. So we have a tool where we can monitor the effect of drugs up to 2 weeks when the spheroid actually is a resemble the tumor because it's inside of the skin. And then let's try to do something with the therapy. So that's what we did with the same nanoparticles that I showed before with verfurafenib. We look at the skin first, and then the capacity of these lipid nanoparticles to penetrate inside the skin. And they can penetrate, you see. And we quantify the drug that was inside the skin when we have the nanoparticle or the free drug. So in the nanoparticle, you see much more drug in the different layers of the skin compared to the free drug. This is still pharmacokinetic, so permeability. And then we look, it's not in here. We look at the, so we look at the efficacy, but we observe exactly the same trend that we observe for the individual spheroids. So the decrease of the size of the tumor and the cell viability of the tumor. Of course, we need to stop the experiment, to open the skin, take it out by biopsy the tumor, and evaluate the cell viability. And what you observed was a decrease of the cell viability of the tumor mass only compared higher decrease of the verfurafenib when it is in lipid nanoparticles compared to the free drug. And this was actually quite exciting. We didn't publish yet, it's under revision now, but for the first time it was proposed a model where a tumor is, or an artificial tumor, a spheroid, is placed inside a healthy tissue, human tissue, for screening purpose. We saw it also applied for liver, I guess, but it's more complicated. But for the skin, it was the first time that we observed it, so that's why we are very excited with this coming publication. And we are also adapting this spheroid, the melanoma spheroid, for other purposes. For instance, in here, we are using a sensory neurointegrated skin spheroid model. What's the difference? Is that we have keratinocytes fibroblasts, mesenchymal stem cells, and neurons. And why we have neurons? Because we want to use drugs that can be neurosensitive in order to release factors that could somehow modulate the stage of the skin. So there's no tumor cells in here, just LD cells, and the purpose is different. But even though without tumor cells, spheroid can be formed, we did the full characterization of the spheroid. The presence of collagen, remember collagen comes from the fibroblasts. So collagen is there because fibroblasts are active, and if you then want to test different drugs, like this one that we are testing, the X3, that is a neuropeptide, so it's a peptide that can have the capacity to activate neurons, that's why you put neurons on steroid, to inhibit the release of acetylcholine. And why we want to inhibit this? Because it's known that the inhibition of acetylcholines is highly correlated with the increase of production of collagen. And if you increase the production of collagen, skin is in a healthy stage, we can have some regeneration of the skin. And actually that's what we observe. After a certain time point, the production of collagen 1 was significantly increased when we have X3 either in solution or also use a film for the skin compared to the controls that we have. And what we believe is that the fact that we are inhibiting the action of acetylcholine, acetylcholine is not avoid or impairing the production of collagen by the fibroblasts. Very simple tool, of course, not still in vivo, but gives us a clear picture that is possible to have also spheroids to test different therapies rather than chemotherapy or immunotherapy in tumors. Okay, so with this I hope that I have convinced you that these multicellular 3D models can be wonderful and valuable tools for drug screening. Not necessary to validate drugs, but also to discriminate drug therapies. We use it, usually tend to look at the positive data, but negative data can also be very important in this kind of tools. Because if you identify, using these models that we develop, identify drug products that are not going to be better than the standard of care of the free drugs, it's not worth to go to a more complex model to in vivo studies because it's not going to work. So these models are for bad or for good in terms of drug screening. Combination of multi-compartmental approaches is a plus, I would say. So if you have the chance to use 3D spheroids with the environment where these spheroids can grow, you can have more answers to our scientific question that you have. How cell-cell crosstalk can be important, how the contact between LD cells and tumor cells can also condition the action of your drug product, so this is also very important. And don't forget the immune system. So we believe that most of the positive data that you got were possible because of the presence of the macrophages, immune cells. We are just relying on macrophages, but you can use dendritic cells or any other kinds of cells. Because for the therapies, the action of the immune system is important. Right? And we tend to ignore sometimes the immune system, but it's possible to have this combination of the cells if you have the possibility to do it in preclinical setting. Final message, and I like to be very honest with you. Although we have 3D models, I'm sure that in most of the cases we are not going to be able to fully replace animal experimentation. But definitely it will help us to reduce a lot animal experimentation, particularly for those cases where we know by default that the animal data is not going to generate any additional information that we have. But at the end of the day, we need to validate it in a more complex and in vivo system. Okay, just to thank the people that helped me to run all of this, so I'm not able to grow on spheroid at all. I guess I can, but I'm not expert. Some people from the group that have been working on that, some of the international collaborators that we have, one way or another, to help us to validate the spheroids that we have. Also some former group members, they were very important to ground the feeling of importance of the spheroids, and also of course our fundings and our partners that help us to support financially all the group. Well, I'm very happy to address any questions that you may have, and thank you very much again for hosting me here.
Thank you. You can see it's very popular. I'm not sure if it's the wine afterwards or the lovely talk that you've given. But that was brilliant. I want to find out who here can grow spheroids, organoids, or tumoroids. Just to see. Okay, so we've got a lot of people who can ask lots of questions. So, and what I liked about, the real model I liked was the lung, the one that you developed for the osteosarcoma and the lung to look at, metastases. But I think it may be also useful for infectious disease evaluation, particularly in the issue around TB and also the blood-brain barrier interfaces for other molecules. So that was wonderful. So thanks very much for that. So I think it's open for you to ask questions.
So much for the wonderful work. We're working on organoid T lymphocyte cultures. So just a few questions. The first was with the CRC model. You mentioned agarose embedding of the cultures. What percentage of agarose are you using for the embedding? And how does that facilitate the diffusion of media into the co-cultures?
Okay. Actually, so the agarose band is just for the construction of the wall. So we coat the layers of the wells with agarose just to avoid the absorption of the cells, addition of cells to the plates. That's all. So the agarose is not make part of the final composition of the sphere. So it's just a way that we have to make the cells aggregate themselves and not to adhere to the plastics that we are using. So agarose is not a big part of the process. Okay.
And then the next question was the media composition to support all of the 4 distinct cell types in your model, the ratios that you're using to support
Sometimes this is
their
an
viability.
issue. Sometimes it is, particularly when we have individual cells that grow in different media, and then we need to combine different cells that have different specifications in terms of growth. So we do it in both ways. Or we educate the cells to grow in all of them in the same media first. So a few days before we put all in the same media, but we need to assure that they don't have issues in terms of growing, in terms of losing expression of some receptors. If it works, great. In the case that it's not possible, what we do is we mix media. So we have 50%, it depends on the ratio. But we always optimize the media that you use at the end. So it's usually you have the same sphere growing, I don't know, 50-50, 75-25, whatever. And we see if you have issues in terms of growing of the sphere, you rely on the size and cell viability. So we need also always to optimize. But if you have the opportunity to put the cells growing all in the same medium, and if you don't have issues in terms of the proper maturation of the cells, great. And we have been lucky, actually. We've been lucky.
Cool. And then just lastly, have you looked at how the nanoparticles are affecting viability of the individual cell types through flow cytometry, for example?
Yeah, that we do. So this is of characterization that we have for the cell ratio at the end. So every time we need to do it, we need to disintegrate the spheroid, and we do cell cytometry. You can do both ways, or you have dyes for the receptor, or when we do, sometimes we use cell trackers. So we label the cells prior the aggregation, and the trackers can stay in a time there of 5 to 7 days, fine. And so then we don't need to label the cells for the facts because they are pre-labeled and they retain these labeling capacity. So then, definitely by facts.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know, with very highly vascular tissue, tumor tissue that you're trying to model, could we use parasites with the endothelial tissue?
You mean for the glandus model with the endothelial layer?
Yes. So if you can you use parasites?
Sure.
Or is
Yeah,
that,
you can. We did it actually. On the basolateral side of it, also we put parasites. There are some modification of the model I didn't mention. I was talking about microorganisms, for instance. That's something that we are also doing. For instance, for the lung, for the intestine, for the model with the colorectal tumor with epithelium, we are putting bacteria for the microbiota and to see which is the impact of this bacteria on the growth of the spheroid. If there's no impact, we can test simultaneously therapy for the tumor and for treating the infection or to modulate the microbiome. And for the lung, the same. We are co-culture with commensal bacteria, so it's a way to combine more than one scientific question that you have, which is the impact of the cells and which is the impact of the microbiome that you may have. So you can combine. For the cells that are present on the BBB, you can do it with glia cells, with neurons as well. So this combination are flexible because the media is the same again. So it's important that you have theoretical conditions to maintain the cells.
I just wanted to know, with your modeling systems that you have here, have you gone into any kind of higher scale for ECM components to add to these, especially with your organoids, knowing that that would be a really important part to actually be able to then use that for the modeling and screening.
Okay. Just to clarify, all of these examples I show you are not, we call it as spheroids because they are made of immortalized cells, except those that for the skin that we are using primary cells, but still they have the spheroid-like shape. None of those were made of stem cells or primary cells from organoids. But independent of that, we do not supplement with extracellular matrix. We expect that the cells can secrete extracellular components to feed themselves in terms of sphere. The only models that we supplement with extracellular matrix are the biological barriers, the epithelium. For the lung, for instance, or for the intestine, we put fibroblasts growing inside collagen and hyaluronic acid, but in that case it's mandatory to have it, otherwise the fibroblasts do not survive. But for the spheroid itself, we do not supplement. We expect, and actually observe, that cells secrete their own extracellular matrix. And this extracellular matrix is responsible for the maintenance of the 3D architecture of the spheroid.
Have you looked at exosomes being released from any of these things, maybe? And how can that be? I mean, you talked about cell-centered communication. Is there any role for that to optimize, to get your spheroids going faster, better, longer?
Okay, simple answer. No, we didn't look at exosomes yet. We know that there's something that is communicating, particularly when we have factors that we release and differentiate the cells. We didn't look because it was not our interest, but I'm sure that the cell-cell communication happens due to these vesicles that send signals to the others. And that's why we have a particular interest on the macrophage differentiation. Because it's easy to have M1 or M2, depending on the cocktail that you have on the media, you can differentiate them. But understanding why naturally you have a tendency to have a more pro-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory response of the spheroid, it's definitely because of the communication. But it's not our interest, but I'm sure that we can understand why this differentiation occurs. Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Thank you, my pleasure.